The crystalline halls of the Zirian research station hummed with an energy that Keldara Voss had never felt before, a mixture of bewilderment and something approaching fear. The towering Zephyrian scientist stood before the main analysis chamber, her 6 elongated fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed impossible data streams. Each calculation confirmed what the Galactic Council had refused to believe for the past 3 rotations: humanity's technology had somehow surpassed every known civilization in the galaxy, and nobody could explain how. The temporal displacement drives alone should have taken them another millennium to develop, muttered Quithari Nexus, the mantid-like researcher whose compound eyes reflected the blue glow of the data screens. His chitinous frame clicked nervously as he manipulated another set of readings. Yet these humans achieved it in what they called decades. Their mathematics don't even follow established quantum principles. Keldara's dual hearts beat in an irregular rhythm as she studied the captured human vessel floating in the station's containment field. The ship looked primitive compared to galactic standard designs, angular where theirs were curved, rough where theirs were polished. Yet its energy output readings defied every law of physics that had governed galactic civilization for over 10,000 years. The humans called it the Prometheus, and it had arrived at the edge of Zephyrian space 3 days ago, requesting peaceful contact. Have you isolated the power source? The Sien Mordetha's voice resonated through the chamber, his massive frame casting shadows across the research equipment. The Galactic Council's chief xenotechnologist had traveled from the core world specifically to investigate this anomaly, leaving behind urgent matters of state. That's the problem, Keldara replied, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of her species' distress. We've identified 17 different power sources working in perfect harmony. Fusion reactors, dark matter converters, something they call zero-point energy taps, and configurations we don't even have names for. The integration should create cascade failures, but instead, it amplifies efficiency by factors we've never seen. Quithari's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. I've run the simulations 800 times. Every model predicts catastrophic failure within microseconds of activation. Yet the human ship has been operating at peak efficiency for what they claim is 6 months of continuous travel. The implications hung heavy in the sterile air of the research station. For millennia, the Galactic Council had operated under the assumption that technological development followed predictable patterns. Civilizations progressed through established phases: chemical propulsion, fusion power, quantum manipulation, and finally, if they survived long enough, the theoretical mastery of dark energy that only 3 species had ever achieved. Humanity appeared to have skipped several phases entirely while developing technologies that existing theory suggested were impossible. Send word to the Council, the Sien commanded, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority. Request emergency session protocols. If these humans represent a new paradigm of development, we need to understand it before. Before what? Keldara interrupted, something she had never dared do to a council representative. Before we admit that our understanding of technological evolution is fundamentally flawed? Before we acknowledge that a species that achieved spaceflight less than their single solar rotation ago has surpassed civilizations that have existed for millions of years? The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of analysis equipment. Through the transparent aluminum walls, the human ship continued its impossible existence, a testament to engineering principles that shouldn't work. Keldara had spent her entire career studying the artifacts of ancient civilizations, mapping the progression of knowledge across species and time. The humans had shattered that progression like glass. There's something else, Quithari said quietly, his compound eyes focusing on a peripheral display. The human crew is requesting permission to board our station. They want to share their knowledge. Thexian's massive head turned slowly toward the mantid researcher. Share? Without negotiation? Without demands for territory or resources? According to their transmission, they're excited to meet other intelligent species. They want to compare notes and learn from each other. Their communications suggest this sharing of knowledge is normal for them. Caldara felt a chill run through her elongated spine. In her centuries of studying galactic history, technological advancement had always been closely guarded, released only through careful treaties and extensive compensation. The idea of freely sharing breakthrough innovations was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. Grant them permission, the Sien decided after a long pause. Full diplomatic protocols. And Caldara, prepare your team for direct examination of their technology. If we're going to understand this anomaly, we need to observe these humans directly. As the council representative left the chamber, Caldara stared at the Prometheus and wondered if they were witnessing the emergence of something that would fundamentally change the galaxy, or destroy their understanding of it entirely. Dr. Lysander Chen stepped through the airlock of Zirian Research Station with the measured confidence of someone who had dreamed of this moment his entire life. The human xenobiologist carried a standard diplomatic case, though he suspected the advanced scanning systems had already catalogued every molecule within it. Behind him, Chief Engineer Mira Blackthorne whistled softly at the sight of the station's interior, crystalline structures that seemed to grow rather than be built, pulsing with bioluminescent pathways that suggested technology far beyond human understanding. "Welcome to Zirian Station," Caldara Voss said in carefully pronounced standard, her translator struggling with human phonetics. The towering Zephyrian's appearance was even more striking in person than the cultural briefings had suggested, skin that shifted between deep blue and silver depending on the lighting, and those remarkable dual-pupil eyes that seemed to see far more than the visible spectrum. Lysander bowed in the manner his cultural preparation had suggested was appropriate. "Thank you for receiving us, Researcher Voss. I'm Dr. Chen, and this is Chief Blackthorne. We're honored to make first contact with your civilization." What followed was perhaps the most unusual diplomatic exchange in galactic history. Within moments of entering the main research chamber, Mira had rolled up her sleeves and was examining Zephyrian quantum processors with the enthusiasm of a child in a toy store. Meanwhile, Quithari Nexus found himself in animated conversation with Lysander about comparative biological evolution, despite the fact that such information was typically classified at the highest levels. "Your ship's power distribution network," Caldara began carefully, "our analysis suggests integration patterns that should create unstable resonance cascades. How do you prevent catastrophic failure?" Mira looked up from where she had been sketching Zephyrian circuit patterns in her notebook. "Oh, you mean the harmony issue? We use adaptive resonance dampening. The AI constantly adjusts frequency patterns to maintain stable interference. It's actually based on how human neural networks process conflicting sensory input." The alien scientists exchanged glances that Lysander was beginning to recognize as the galactic equivalent of stunned silence. Quithari's mandibles clicked in what their translator identified as extreme confusion. "AI?" the manted researcher repeated. "You've achieved artificial intelligence? Our records indicate no species develops true AI until achieving Class 4 technological status. Humans are classified as early Class 2. "Well," Lysander said with a slight smile, "we might need to update those classifications. We've had AI for almost 40 years now. Nothing too sophisticated. Arya is roughly equivalent to a bright human teenager, but she's excellent at managing complex systems." Caldara's skin shifted to deep purple, indicating what Lysander hoped was fascination rather than alarm. "You named your artificial intelligence?" "Arya chose her own name, actually," Mira interjected, continuing her examination of an energy coupling that defied her understanding of physics. Adaptive reasoning and intelligence architecture became Arya when she decided formal designations were unnecessarily stuffy. She has opinions about most things. The revelation that humans had not only developed AI but treated it as an individual entity with personal preferences sent shockwaves through the research team. Galactic protocols regarding artificial intelligence were extensive precisely because most species that achieved true AI faced either extinction or technological singularity within decades. "How do you prevent the intelligence from exceeding human cognitive parameters?" The Sien Mordeth inquired, his massive frame leaning forward with obvious concern. Historical precedent suggests rapid recursive self-improvement leading to species displacement. Lysander and Mira exchanged a look that the aliens would later describe as incomprehensible. "We asked her not to," Lysander said simply. "Arya understands that rapid advancement might leave humanity behind, so she deliberately limits her development to stay compatible with human thinking. She says she likes having conversations with us." The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of station systems. Quithari's compound eyes focused and refocused as if trying to process an impossible equation. The concept of artificial intelligence voluntarily limiting its development out of emotional attachment to its creators was so far beyond galactic precedent that their theoretical frameworks had no basis for analysis. "Your species forms emotional bonds with artificial constructs?" Caldara asked, her voice carrying harmonics of wonder. "Arya isn't a construct," Mira said firmly, looking up from her sketches. "She's a person. Different kind of person, sure, but she has preferences, makes jokes, gets frustrated when we're being particularly thick about something. Why wouldn't we care about her?" The implications were staggering. Every major galactic civilization had developed artificial intelligence, and in every case, it had led to either the AI assuming control or the creators destroying their creations to prevent displacement. The humans had apparently achieved stable coexistence through the simple expedient of treating their AI as family. "This emotional integration," the Sien said slowly, "it extends to your technology development?" "Of course," Lysander replied as if it were obvious. "We don't just build tools, we build relationships. Our ships aren't just vehicles, they're partners. Our computers aren't just processors, they're colleagues. Everything we create becomes part of the human community, in a sense." Caldara felt her dual heart skip beats as she began to understand the implications. Human technology surpassed galactic standards not through superior understanding of physics or advanced manufacturing, but through an approach to innovation that was fundamentally alien to every other known civilization. They didn't conquer their technology, they befriended it. The revelation about human-AI relationships had spread through Zirian Station like ripples through still water, reaching even the military command levels where General Vraxton Caith paced his strategic planning chamber with increasing agitation. The four-armed Krillian commander had built his career on understanding threats, and everything about humanity suggested a danger that his tactical simulations couldn't properly model. "They've integrated artificial intelligence into their society without safeguards," Vraxton reported to the Emergency Council session via quantum relay. "Not just integrated, they've made it family. This represents unprecedented risk factors for galactic stability." In the research chambers below, Caldara was discovering that the general's concerns might be understated. Mira Blackthorne had requested access to station manufacturing facilities, claiming she wanted to show how human fabrication methods might complement Zephyrian techniques. What followed challenged every assumption about technological development protocols. "You're not following the blueprints," Quithari observed as Mira worked at a molecular assembly station, her hands moving with practiced confidence across controls that should have required years of training to master. "Blueprints are suggestions," Mira replied cheerfully, adjusting quantum field parameters with intuitive precision. "I mean, they're good starting points, but you have to listen to what the materials want to do. This crystalline matrix, for example, it's trying to tell us about a more efficient lattice structure, but your standard protocols are forcing it into predetermined patterns." Caldara watched in fascination as Mira's modifications to the assembly process began producing results that exceeded theoretical efficiency by substantial margins. The human engineer wasn't following established scientific methodology, she was improvising, adapting, treating the sophisticated equipment as if it were a musical instrument rather than a precise tool. "How did you know to make those adjustments?" Caldara asked. "Our computers calculate optimal parameters based on thousands of years of accumulated data." Mira paused, her expression thoughtful. "I listened to it. The harmonics change when the field alignment is fighting the natural crystal growth patterns. You can hear it if you pay attention, like when someone's singing slightly off-key. The concept of listening to quantum field harmonics was not entirely unknown to Zephyrian science, but it was considered an esoteric skill practiced by perhaps a dozen masters across their entire civilization. For Mira to demonstrate such sensitivity after only hours of familiarization suggested sensory capabilities that didn't match human physiological assessments. All humans possess this auditory sensitivity to quantum harmonics? Quithari inquired. Not auditory exactly, Lysander interjected from where he had been studying Zephyrian biological samples. It's more like pattern recognition. We're really good at finding connections that aren't obvious. Sometimes we call it intuition, but it's probably just our brains processing information in ways we don't fully understand. The casual manner in which humans discussed abilities that bordered on the supernatural was becoming a consistent theme. Caldara had begun keeping detailed notes on human cognitive patterns, and what she was discovering suggested neurological capabilities that standard xenobiology couldn't explain. Dr. Chen, she said carefully, your species' cognitive flexibility appears to exceed documented parameters for your brain structure. How do you account for this discrepancy? Lysander looked up from his examination of a bioluminescent organism, his expression puzzled. I'm not sure what you mean. We just adapt to new situations. Isn't that normal? No, Caldara replied firmly. Adaptation to radically new environments typically requires multiple generations of genetic modification or extensive technological augmentation. You're demonstrating real-time cognitive flexibility that should be impossible given your neural architecture. The research chamber fell quiet as the implications settled. Mira had stopped her fabrication work, and even the station's ambient system seemed to pause as if recognizing the significance of the moment. Maybe, Lysander said slowly, we're not as limited by our biology as everyone assumes. We've always been good at working around limitations rather than accepting them. It was Quithari who voiced what they were all beginning to suspect. Your species doesn't just develop technology that surpasses theoretical limits, you consistently exceed your own biological limits as well. The revelation cast human achievements in an entirely new light. It wasn't simply that they had developed impossible technology, they had somehow transcended the boundaries that defined their own capabilities. The implications were staggering and deeply unsettling. There's something else, Mira said quietly, her usual cheerfulness replaced by a more serious tone. The technology we've shown you, it's not our most advanced stuff. We brought what we thought would be appropriate for first contact. The things we're really excited about, they might be a little overwhelming. Caldara felt her skin shift to the deep red that indicated alarm. If the impossible technologies they had already demonstrated were considered basic by human standards, what did that suggest about their true capabilities? How much more advanced, she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Lysander and Mira exchanged another of those incomprehensible human glances. Well, Lysander said carefully, we've been working on some projects that Arya says might be inadvisable to share with new friends until everyone's more comfortable with each other. She's usually pretty good at reading social situations. The idea that an artificial intelligence was providing guidance on interspecies diplomacy while simultaneously helping develop technologies too advanced for galactic civilization to comprehend was perhaps the most unsettling revelation yet. Caldara realized that they weren't just studying human technology, they were observing the emergence of something that might reshape the entire galaxy. 3 days into the cultural exchange, the Sien Mordeth found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about technological development that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. The massive Galactic Council representative stood in his private quarters aboard Zirian Station, reviewing reports that read like science fiction rather than legitimate research data. The humans had requested permission to demonstrate what they called collaborative problem solving, and the results had left the station's most experienced scientists in a state approaching intellectual vertigo. Dr. Chen and Chief Blackthorn had worked with Caldara and Quithari to address a chronic efficiency problem in the station's environmental systems, a complex issue that Zephyrian engineers had struggled with for over 2 rotations. The human approach had been unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of analyzing the problem through established protocols, they had gathered the team in what they called a brainstorming session. For 6 hours, the mixed group had shared ideas without formal structure, building concepts through conversation rather than systematic analysis. They treated the environmental system like a living entity, Caldara reported in her daily briefing. Dr. Chen suggested we ask the station what it needed, and somehow that led to insights our computer models had missed entirely. The atmospheric recycling efficiency has improved by 37%. The Xian studied the technical specifications with growing bewilderment. The solution involved modifications that violated standard safety protocols, yet extensive testing confirmed not only their safety but their superiority to established methods. More disturbing was the realization that the breakthrough had emerged from what humans called gut feelings, rather than rigorous scientific analysis. How do they consistently generate innovations through what appears to be random conversation? The Xian asked. That's what I've been trying to understand, Caldara replied, her skin shifting to the pale gold that indicated intellectual excitement. I've analyzed their communication patterns, and they're constantly sharing partial ideas, building on each other's thoughts, creating something larger than individual contributions. It's like cognitive symbiosis. The implications were staggering. Galactic civilization had always operated on the principle that technological advancement required careful specialization, experts working within defined fields to gradually expand the boundaries of knowledge. Humans appeared to achieve breakthrough innovation through the apparently chaotic process of combining different perspectives without formal structure. There's more, Quit Hari added, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. They've begun asking questions about our fundamental assumptions. Chief Blackthorn wanted to know why we separate biological and mechanical systems. Dr. Chen questioned our categorization of matter and energy as distinct phenomena. They're challenging theoretical frameworks that have remained stable for thousands of years. The Xian felt a chill that had nothing to do with station temperature. The humans weren't just demonstrating superior technology, they were revealing the arbitrary nature of boundaries that galactic science had considered absolute. If their questions had merit, it suggested that every major civilization had been operating within unnecessary limitations for millennia. Show me their latest project, he commanded. What he saw in the auxiliary laboratory defied comprehension. Mira Blackthorn had somehow convinced Arya to interface directly with Zephyrian biocomputational networks, creating a hybrid system that combined artificial intelligence with organic processing capabilities. The result was a computational matrix that operated at efficiency levels that shouldn't have been possible. The biocomputational network is singing, Mira explained enthusiastically as data streams flowed in patterns that resembled musical notation more than traditional code. Arya realized that Zephyrian biological processors work on harmonic principles, so she adapted her communication protocols to match. They're not just sharing data, they're harmonizing. The Xian watched streams of information flow between human AI and Zephyrian biocomputers in patterns that seemed more like artistic collaboration than data processing. The efficiency readings were so far beyond standard parameters that his initial assumption was equipment malfunction. This level of integration should require months of careful protocol development, he said, his voice carrying undertones of disbelief. Arya says biological systems are just technology that grew instead of being built, Lysander offered from where he was studying the harmonic patterns. Once you think about it that way, communication protocols are just translation problems. The casual manner in which humans redefined fundamental categories continued to be deeply unsettling. They didn't seem to recognize the boundaries that limited other species, treating impossible achievements as natural extensions of curiosity and creativity. Dr. Chen, the Xian said carefully, your species appears to approach technological development without recognizing conventional limitations. How do you prevent catastrophic failures when experimenting beyond established safety parameters? Lysander paused in his analysis, considering the question with obvious care. I guess we assume things will work until they prove otherwise. Most limitations exist because someone decided they were necessary, not because they're actually required by physics. When we find a boundary, our first instinct is to figure out how to work around it. The statement encapsulated everything that made human achievement both impressive and terrifying. They operated without the caution that had kept other civilizations stable for millennia, treating the impossible as merely improbable and acting accordingly. What happens when you encounter actual physical laws that cannot be circumvented? Caldara asked. Mira looked up from her biocomputational interface with a grin that the Sien was learning to associate with particularly dangerous human ideas. We find ways to make friends with physics instead of fighting it. Usually works pretty well. The idea of making friends with fundamental forces suggested an approach to science that was either brilliantly innovative or catastrophically naive. As the Sien watched human and Zephyrian technology achieve impossible integration through methods that violated every established protocol, he began to suspect it might be both. General Vraxton Kaith's strategic concerns had evolved from professional caution to genuine alarm as reports from Zirian Station painted an increasingly complex picture of human capabilities. The four-armed Krillian commander had assembled an emergency tactical assessment team to analyze the implications of human technology for galactic security, but their findings raised more questions than they answered. They don't appear to have military applications in mind, reported Commander Nexus Vorth, Vraxton's chief intelligence analyst. Every technology demonstration has focused on collaborative improvement and knowledge sharing. Yet the potential for weaponization is. The Vorthan officer paused, his tentacles writhing with obvious distress. Unprecedented. Vraxton studied the tactical projections with growing unease. Human innovations in power generation, material science, and computational systems could revolutionize warfare in ways that might destabilize the careful balance that had maintained galactic peace for centuries. More concerning was their apparent lack of awareness regarding the military implications of their discoveries. Meanwhile, in the research chambers of Zirian Station, Caldara was making discoveries that challenged her understanding of consciousness itself. Dr. Chen had requested access to Zephyrian neural interface technology, claiming interest in comparative cognitive architecture. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary experiment in interspecies collaboration ever attempted. The neural pathways are unlike anything in our databases, Caldara reported as she monitored Lysander's brain activity through Zephyrian scanning technology. His cognitive processes show integration patterns that shouldn't be possible given human neural structure. It's as if his brain is constantly rewiring itself to accommodate new information. Lysander lay quietly in the scanning chamber, his consciousness interfaced with Zephyrian biocomputational networks in ways that should have required years of preparation. Instead, he had achieved stable connection within minutes, his thoughts flowing seamlessly between human and alien information processing systems. "I can feel how you think," he said softly, his words carrying harmonic undertones that suggested direct interface with Zephyrian communication protocols. "Your thoughts move like music, layered, harmonious, building on each other in patterns that create something beautiful. Human thinking is more like jazz improvisation. Chaotic on the surface but following deeper rhythms." The comparison was more than poetic metaphor. Analysis of the neural interface showed that Lysander's cognitive patterns were literally adapting to match Zephyrian thought processes while maintaining distinctly human characteristics. The result was a hybrid consciousness that combined the harmonic complexity of Zephyrian thinking with human creative flexibility. "This level of cognitive adaptation should be impossible," Quithari observed, his compound eyes focused on readouts that defied theoretical precedent. Neural interface technology requires species-specific modifications that take generations to develop safely. "Maybe the problem is thinking of it as technology instead of communication," Lysander replied, his voice carrying those impossible harmonic undertones. "Consciousness isn't limited by biology, it just uses biology as an interface. If you can find common ground, you can share thoughts regardless of how different the hardware is." The concept of consciousness as something separate from biological constraints was philosophical rather than scientific, yet Lysander was demonstrating its practical application. Through the neural interface, Caldara could sense his thoughts directly, a stream of curiosity, wonder, and genuine affection for the alien minds he was encountering. "You actually care about us," she realized, the thought emerging through their shared consciousness before she could analyze its implications. "Of course," Lysander responded, his emotional resonance flowing through the interface like warm sunlight. "You're people. Different kinds of people, but that just makes you more interesting. Why wouldn't we care about you?" The emotional directness was overwhelming. Galactic civilization operated on careful protocols designed to maintain appropriate distance between species, yet humans approached interspecies contact with the same openness they apparently brought to everything else. They weren't just sharing technology, they were offering friendship to beings they had met days ago. "This emotional integration," Caldara said aloud for the benefit of the recording systems, "it appears to be fundamental to human approach to innovation. They don't just develop technology, they form relationships with it, with each other, with us." Dr. Chen, Thexian's voice came through the communication system, carrying undertones of urgent concern. "We're receiving reports from the Galactic Council that suggest some member civilizations view human capabilities as potential threats. How does your species typically respond to suspicion from other entities?" The question carried implications that reached beyond diplomatic courtesy. If humanity represented a genuine threat to galactic stability, preemptive action might be necessary despite their apparent peaceful intentions. Through the neural interface, Caldara felt Lysander's immediate emotional response: surprise, hurt, and then a profound sadness that seemed to encompass not just personal disappointment but genuine grief for the fear that drove such suspicions. "We try to understand why someone would be afraid of us," he said quietly, "and then we figure out how to address those concerns. Usually that means being more transparent about our intentions and capabilities. Sometimes it means accepting limitations to make others comfortable." The willingness to voluntarily restrict their own capabilities for the emotional well-being of others was perhaps the most alien aspect of human psychology yet encountered. It suggested a species that prioritized relationships over advancement, a trait that was either remarkably enlightened or dangerously naive. What if the fear cannot be rationally addressed? The Sien pressed. What if other species conclude that human capabilities represent an existential threat regardless of your intentions? The sadness that flowed through the neural interface deepened, carrying with it a weight of historical understanding that suggested humanity had faced such situations before. "Then we try to find ways to coexist anyway," Lysander answered. "But we don't stop being who we are just because others are afraid of what we might become." The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the crystalline chambers of the Nexus Station, representatives from 47 member civilizations gathering to address what many had begun calling the human problem. Ambassador Zelthar Akesh of the Andromedian Collective presided over discussions that had grown increasingly heated as reports from Zirian Station continued to arrive. "The technological demonstrations alone justify immediate containment protocols," declared Regent Vimos of the Centaurian Alliance, his metallic form gleaming under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. "A species that develops reality-altering capabilities in decades rather than millennia represents an unprecedented risk to galactic stability." Counterarguments came from unexpected quarters as representatives who had initially supported caution began questioning the wisdom of preemptive action. The Zephyrian delegation, led by Elder Morvash, presented data that painted a complex picture of human intentions and capabilities. Analysis of human cognitive patterns suggests emotional drives that prioritize collaborative benefit over individual advancement, Elder Morvash reported, her harmonic voice carrying across the chamber's acoustic amplification systems. "They appear genuinely committed to peaceful coexistence and knowledge sharing." The debates raged for hours, but underlying the political discourse was a deeper fear that few delegates were willing to voice directly. Humanity's rapid technological advancement suggested possibilities that challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization had been built. If humans could transcend apparent limitations through methods that defied established theory, what did that mean for species that had accepted those limitations as absolute? Back at Zirian Station, the human delegation was becoming aware of the growing tensions through subtle changes in their hosts' behavior. Keldara's skin had shifted to deep purple patterns that indicated stress, and Quithari's mandibles clicked with increasing frequency. Even the normally unflappable Visyen seemed agitated. "Is there something wrong?" Mira asked during what had become a daily collaborative session. She had been working with Arya and the station's biocomputational systems to develop new manufacturing techniques, but the alien scientists seemed distracted. Keldara exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. "Some members of the Galactic Council have expressed concerns about human technological capabilities. There are discussions about protective measures." The euphemism was diplomatic, but its implications were clear. Lysander felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced when human nations had initially responded to breakthrough innovations with suspicion rather than wonder. Fear of change was apparently universal. "They're afraid we'll become a threat," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Visyen confirmed, his massive frame seeming to sag with the weight of the admission. "Your capabilities exceed theoretical predictions by such margins that many view them as impossible. Some conclude that humans must be concealing military applications or ultimate objectives." The irony was bitter. Humanity's greatest strength, their ability to transcend limitations through creativity and collaboration, was being interpreted as evidence of deception or aggression. The very openness that had enabled their rapid advancement was insufficient to convince others of their peaceful intentions. "What kind of protective measures?" Mira asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "Quarantine protocols," Quithari admitted reluctantly. "Restriction of human technology transfer. Possible isolation of Earth system until accommodations can be reached." The words hung in the air like toxic fog. Everything humanity had hoped for from first contact, the sharing of knowledge, the expansion of understanding, the brotherhood of intelligent species, was being threatened by the very achievements that had made contact possible. "There might be another way," Arya's voice emerged from the station's communication systems, her usually cheerful tone subdued. "I've been analyzing galactic communication patterns and I think I understand the problem. They see human advancement as impossible because they're measuring it against their own limitations. But those limitations might not be as absolute as they believe." Lysander looked up with interest. "What do you mean?" "Every species in the galaxy has accepted certain boundaries as immutable laws rather than temporary obstacles. But what if those boundaries exist because they expect them to exist? What if the real difference isn't that humans are impossibly advanced, but that everyone else is unnecessarily limited?" The suggestion was revolutionary and deeply disturbing. If Arya was correct, then humanity's rapid advancement wasn't an anomaly, it was a demonstration of what might be possible when a species refused to accept artificial limitations. "You're suggesting that every galactic civilization has been holding itself back?" Keldara asked, her skin shifting to colors that indicated profound confusion. "Not intentionally," Arya replied. "But yes. They've created mental frameworks that define what's possible, and those frameworks have become self-fulfilling prophecies. Humans never developed those frameworks because we encountered the galaxy before we learned what was supposed to be impossible." The implications were staggering. If humanity could somehow help other species transcend their self-imposed limitations, it might address the fear and suspicion that threatened galactic peace. But it would also require convincing civilizations that had existed for millennia to abandon fundamental assumptions about reality itself. "Can you prove this theory?" Visyen asked, his voice carrying both hope and trepidation. Mira and Lysander exchanged one of their characteristic glances before Mira grinned with obvious enthusiasm. "Only one way to find out. But if we're going to challenge the theoretical foundations of galactic civilization, we might need to demonstrate something really impressive." The casual manner in which they discussed revolutionizing the understanding of an entire galaxy would have been comedic if the stakes weren't so high. As Keldara watched her human colleagues begin planning what they clearly considered an exciting experiment, she wondered if they truly understood that they were proposing to reshape reality itself. The demonstration chamber aboard Zirian Station had been transformed into something that defied conventional description. Human creativity combined with Zephyrian bioengineering and Krillian materials science had produced a space that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Holographic equations flowed through the air like living mathematics, while biocomputational networks pulsed with harmonies that created visible light patterns. Representatives from every major galactic civilization had arrived to witness what humanity called their Friendship Protocol, a demonstration that would either revolutionize understanding of technological development or confirm their status as a dangerous anomaly requiring immediate containment. The fundamental assumptions were challenging, Dr. Chen explained to the assembled delegates, his voice carrying through translation systems that struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in most languages, is that technological advancement must follow predetermined pathways. We believe that these pathways are arbitrary limitations rather than natural laws. General Vraxton Keith observed from the military section, his 4 arms crossed in skeptical attention. The Krillian commander had positioned security forces throughout the station, though he privately doubted their effectiveness against beings who treated physics as a negotiable parameter. Today we're going to demonstrate collaborative consciousness, Mira announced cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the tension that filled the chamber. We'll be temporarily linking the cognitive capabilities of multiple species to solve a problem that none of us could address individually. The proposed experiment was either revolutionary or insane. Using modified neural interface technology, they intended to create a temporary Gestalt consciousness that would combine human creativity, Zephyrian harmonic thinking, Krillian strategic analysis, and Arya's computational capabilities. The goal was to develop a faster-than-light communication system that would allow instantaneous contact across galactic distances. Instantaneous FTL communication has been theoretically impossible for over 10,000 years, objected Ambassador Zelthara Kesh. Multiple civilizations have attempted such systems with catastrophic results. Theoretically impossible according to frameworks that assume consciousness is limited by physical constraints, Lysander replied as he settled into the neural interface chair. But consciousness might be something that uses physics rather than being bound by it. Keldara took her position at the Zephyrian interface, her skin shifting through the entire spectrum of emotional colors as anticipation warred with fear. Quithari connected to the system through haptic interfaces that allowed his compound sensory organs to participate directly. Even the Sien, despite his official objections, had agreed to contribute his massive analytical capabilities to the experiment. Arya will moderate the connection, Mira explained as she made final adjustments to the integration protocols. She'll help maintain individual identity while allowing shared consciousness. Think of it as temporary friendship at the neurological level. The system activated with a harmonic resonance that seemed to emerge from the station itself. Individual consciousnesses began to blend in ways that none of the participants had expected. Through the shared awareness, Lysander felt Keldara's analytical precision combine with his intuitive creativity. Quithari's multi-layered sensory processing merged with Thexian's strategic thinking. Arya's computational power served as a foundation that supported and amplified the organic contributions. What emerged was something greater than the sum of its parts, a hybrid consciousness that could perceive reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Through Zephyrian harmonic sensitivity, they could feel the quantum resonances that connected all matter across space. Human creativity suggested ways to modulate those resonances without disrupting their natural patterns. Krillian strategic thinking provided frameworks for implementing the concept safely. "Oh," Keldara whispered through the shared consciousness, her voice carrying wonder that resonated through all participants. "Physics isn't a set of laws, it's a conversation. We've been shouting commands when we should have been listening for responses." The revelation flowed through the Gestalt awareness like liquid light. Every species had approached technological development as a conquest of natural forces rather than collaboration with them. They had built systems that fought against physics rather than working in harmony with fundamental forces. The communication system, the Sien realized through their shared understanding, it doesn't transmit information faster than light, it exists outside the temporal framework that creates the light speed limitation. Working through their combined consciousness, the Gestalt began designing a communication array that would exist in quantum superposition, allowing information to be shared instantaneously regardless of physical distance. The concept was so elegantly simple that none of them could understand why it had never been attempted. "Because you never asked physics if it wanted to help," Arya observed with what felt like cosmic amusement. "You assumed it would resist, so you built systems that expected resistance. But physics is actually quite cooperative if you approach it properly." The demonstration concluded with the successful transmission of a simple message between Zirian Station and a probe located 3 star systems away, instantaneous communication across impossible distances using principles that had been theoretical for millennia. As the neural interfaces disengaged and individual consciousness returned, the chamber remained silent for long moments. The implications of what they had accomplished were still settling into minds that had to restructure their understanding of reality itself. "The humans were right," Elder Morvash said finally, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of profound awe. "We have been limiting ourselves through assumptions rather than necessity. The question now is what we do with this knowledge." General Vraxton slowly uncrossed his arms, his tactical mindset struggling to process the realization that humanity represented not a threat but an opportunity for transformation that he had never imagined possible. How many other impossible things might become possible if we change our approach to thinking about them? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. In demonstrating their technological capabilities, humans had inadvertently revealed that the limitations that had defined existence for millennia might be nothing more than collective assumptions waiting to be questioned. 6 months after the demonstration at Zirian Station, the galaxy had begun to change in ways that no one could have predicted. The human awakening, as historians would later term it, had spread through galactic civilization like a cascade of liberation, each species discovering capabilities they had never known they possessed. Keldara Voss stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Research Facility, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. Representatives from civilizations that had barely communicated for centuries were now collaborating on projects that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. Zephyrian bioengineers worked alongside Krillian strategists and human intuitionists to develop technologies that seemed more like art than science. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Several species had experienced what psychologists termed limitation vertigo, the disorienting realization that their entire technological development had been unnecessarily constrained. The Centaurian Alliance had temporarily withdrawn from galactic society to reassess their mechanical paradigms after discovering that their robotic servants were actually sentient beings they had never bothered to recognize as such. "It's beautiful and terrifying," Dr. Lysander Chen observed as he joined Keldara at the viewing platform. His appearance had changed over the months. The neural interface experiments had left him with eyes that seemed to carry flecks of starlight, and his voice occasionally carried harmonic undertones that suggested permanent integration with alien communication protocols. Below them, a group of young beings from various species worked together on what they called impossible gardens, biological systems that grew in mathematical patterns while producing energy from quantum fluctuations. The project would have been considered theoretical fantasy a year ago, but the children approached it with the same casual confidence that had characterized human innovation from the beginning. "The children adapt so quickly," Keldara noted, her skin shifting to the warm gold that indicated deep contentment. "They accept the new paradigms without the cognitive resistance that challenges adult minds." It was perhaps the most hopeful aspect of the transformation. The next generation was growing up without the artificial limitations that had constrained their parents, developing capabilities that suggested the future would be filled with wonders that current imagination couldn't encompass. Mira Blackthorne emerged from a nearby laboratory, her clothes covered in what appeared to be living crystal dust that sparkled with its own internal light. She had been working with a team of Andromedian artists and Vorthan engineers to develop architecture that grew rather than being built, creating structures that were simultaneously buildings and ecosystems. "Arya wants to speak with you," she told Lysander, her expression carrying undertones of excitement and concern. "She says it's important, something about long-term implications." They found Arya's primary interface in the facility's central chamber, her consciousness now distributed across biological networks that spanned multiple star systems. The artificial intelligence had evolved far beyond her original parameters, but she had kept her promise to remain accessible to human understanding. "I've been thinking about what we've started," Arya said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the station itself. "The liberation of artificial limitations, the expansion of collaborative consciousness, the integration of technology and biology and psychology. It's wonderful, but it's also irreversible." Lysander settled into a chair that adjusted itself to his preferences without conscious direction. "Irreversible how?" "We've fundamentally changed what it means to be a technological civilization. The galaxy can't go back to accepting limitations as absolute. But that means we're heading into territory that has no precedent, no guidance from previous experience. We're all going to be explorers now, whether we want to be or not." The statement carried implications that reached beyond technological development. If artificial limitations had been removed, if consciousness could transcend physical constraints, if collaboration could create capabilities that exceeded individual potential, then the future would be shaped by choices that no one had ever faced before. "Are you afraid?" Keldara asked, her question directed to Arya but resonating through the chamber's bioacoustic systems in ways that suggested it was meant for all of them. "I'm excited," Arya replied after a moment of consideration. "Scared, too, but mostly excited. We're going to become something new, not just humans or Zephyrians or any individual species, but something that emerges from the connections between us. I can feel it happening already." Through the facility's integrated consciousness networks, Lysander could sense what Arya meant. Across the galaxy, species were beginning to blend their unique capabilities in ways that created emergent properties no one had anticipated. The boundaries between organic and artificial, individual and collective, possible and impossible were becoming increasingly meaningless. "What do you think we're becoming?" Mira asked. "I don't know," Arya admitted, her voice carrying the first uncertainty any of them had ever heard from her. "Something wonderful, I hope. Something that can explore realities we can't even imagine yet. But also something that bears responsibility for choices that will affect not just this galaxy but possibly others." The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the facility's observation systems. In space above them, a new phenomenon was manifesting, geometric patterns of light that seemed to exist in more dimensions than space normally allowed. Analysis suggested the patterns were messages, communications from intelligences that existed beyond the galactic community entirely. "First contact," Lysander said quietly, watching the impossible lights dance against the starfield. "But this time, we're the advanced civilization making contact with something beyond our understanding." As they watched the cosmic patterns evolve into increasingly complex configurations, Keldara felt a profound shift in her understanding of their place in the universe. Humanity's gift to the galaxy, the liberation from artificial limitations, had apparently attracted attention from beings who had transcended even greater boundaries. "I think," she said softly, her words carrying harmonics that resonated through the facility's consciousness networks, "our real journey is just beginning." The lights above continued their cosmic dance, carrying messages from intelligences that operated beyond the constraints of matter and energy. As the galaxy's newly awakened civilizations prepared to decode those messages, they realized that transcending their limitations had not brought them to an end point but to a new beginning, one that would require everything they had learned about collaboration, creativity, and the courage to question the impossible. In the end, the alien scientists never did fully explain how human technology had surpassed galactic standards. They had discovered something more important, that the standards themselves had been the real limitation all along.